Thank you for joining today's National Jewish Camp Security webinar. We'll get started in just a moment. Thank you for joining today's National Jewish Camp Security webinar. My name is Dina Weiss. I serve as Chief of Staff for the Secure Community Network, and I'm grateful to everyone who has joined us today for this important conversation. As you can see, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers and experts who will be joining us for this conversation on the start of camps for the 2021 season. A few notes at the outset before we launch into the program. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all participants following the conclusion of the webinar. All participants are muted and off video, but you are welcome to enter any questions into the Q&A, and we will work through those in the Q&A at the conclusion of the conversation. And keep in mind that, again, you are muted, so the best way to get those questions in is through the Q&A. With that, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Jeremy Fingerman, CEO of Foundation for Jewish Camp.
Thank you, Dina, and welcome everyone. It's really a fabulous turnout, so thanks to the over 200 of you that have joined on this important webinar and a critical topic. On behalf of Foundation for Jewish Camp, I especially would like to thank the team at Secure Community Network for its ongoing efforts to ensure that all of our camps operate safely and securely each summer. We're very proud that our expanded partnership over this past year and a half with generous funding from UJA Federation of New York has, for the first time ever, really established a program and a focus dedicated to the safety and security of our camps. Looking forward to today's discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julie Platt, who will kick us off. Julie is FJC's board chair, a board member of Secure Community Network, and joins us from Los Angeles.
Good morning to all from LA. I would like to thank all the camp leaders, professional and lay, who have joined us at this intensely busy and anxious time. We know how challenging preparing for any camp season is. Preparing for the 2021 camp season is clearly more complicated given the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, from camps being shut for the last year to the different steps we need to take to keep our campers, counselors, and other staff safe and healthy. I know that every camp family, old and new, across the country appreciates your efforts, starting with me. Thousands and thousands of our children are looking forward to a return to camp. Their parents are looking forward to it as well, if not more. For many of them, camp will be the first taste of normalcy and engagement with friends and activities that they have had in over a year. Everyone on this call knows very well the centrality of camp to the Jewish experience. At FJC, we know that the key to the Jewish future is Jewish camp. We know from research and from experience that this is where young people find Jewish role models and create enduring Jewish friendships. It's where they forge a vital, lifelong connection to their essential Jewishness. I've seen it unfold in my own family's devotion to Judaism. From my own transformative experience at Camp Ramah in California, to my 5 children, and now my first 2 grandchildren. Because of how critical camp is to our Jewish experience, it is essential that we ensure a safe, secure, and empowering experience. SCAN has proven in the Federation and community settings the benefits of a comprehensive, coordinated, and best practice-based approach to community security. And this program represents that same approach applied to the security of camps. For we know while Jewish camps remain safe, open, and welcome spaces for our youth, the current risk and threat environment compels us to apply the same level of care and informed approach to safety and security for our camps, as we do in our daily lives, in our houses of worship, schools, and other community spaces. As a Jewish camper alum, a Jewish camp alumni parent, and a Jewish camp grandparent, I'm honored to be participating in this important webinar today and proud to be part of two great organizations whose demonstrated collaboration is ensuring the safety and security of our sacred camps, not just today, but for generations to come. I would now like to introduce Michael Masters, National Director and CEO of Secure Community Network, a camp parent, a trusted partner to FJC, and a valued leader of our community. Michael.
Julie, thank you so much. It's always great to join you and Jeremy. The issue of safety and security has been top of mind for many in our community, and particularly for many affiliated with our camps. Because of that, I first want to echo the thanks that Julie and Jeremy gave to all of you, the professionals and lay leaders that not only make camp possible, but make camp such an important part of Jewish life possible. As Julie mentioned, while I have the honor of serving as the National Director at the Secure Community Network, or SCN, the head of an amazingly dedicated team, and a security professional, I'm also, perhaps more importantly for this call, a proud alumni of Jewish camping, Camp Shy in Lake Delton, Wisconsin, and a parent of Jewish campers. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for all that you do, particularly right now. It has been a long road to get here this summer, and I know our kids can't wait to get to camp. And as Julie said, I know quite a few parents that can't wait for them to get to camp either. I want to thank Julie. She's an amazing partner, leader, and advocate for Jewish life, ensuring that it is fun, engaging, and safe. From her role at FJC to the Jewish Federations in North America and the Federation in Los Angeles to SCN. She encompasses so much of our communal life, and I'm so grateful to have her as a partner and colleague and mentor. I also want to recognize our partners at FJC, Jeremy and his team. The Foundation for Jewish Camp has historically been committed to issues of safety and security, and the relationship between FJC and SCN has been a long one. Over the last several years, though, and in a changing climate, that partnership has become stronger, closer, and more committed. This effort, the program that we are discussing today, made possible by UJA Federation of New York, is taking this to the next level, allowing us to ensure that consistent, best practice, standardized approach to camping with respect to safety and security that Julie spoke about. But it's also making sure that that approach is tailored to each unique camp, working in partnership with law enforcement, existing security efforts, and of course, broader security programs across the country. I want to recognize and thank UJA Federation of New York for making this program possible under Eric Goldstein's leadership. Lastly, I want to thank two critical partners that are joining us today, Sean Brokos, the Federation Security Director for the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, as well as Alan Silverman, the Camp Director for Camp Mosheva in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. All of us on today's call are committed not just to the idea of safety and security, but more broadly and importantly of ensuring that Jewish camp is safe and secure so that it can continue to be that vital pipeline for our young people into Jewish life, a place to grow, nurture, and expand our understanding of Jewish culture, traditions, and to strengthen our whole community. This is more critical now than ever. Prior to the global pandemic, conditions facing the Jewish community in the United States were at a precarious point. Over 60% of all religiously motivated hate crimes in our country directed the Jewish community, the highest level in decades. It should be noted that that number of 60%, the total number of hate crimes, is what we believe to be vastly underreported. And we see the impact of security programs and federations and camps working together so that we can ensure that we're adequately identifying and reporting hate crimes appropriately. The increase in hate crimes against the Jewish population creates the potential for impact to Jewish camps. According to available open source data, Jewish camps have been the target of at least 15 reported anti-Semitic incidents since 2017. Although I think all of us on this webinar know that that number is likely much higher. These incidents have included vandalism of various camp facilities and property, harassment of staff, and threats towards camp attendees. What we have to recognize is while the recent environment where our country and our community have been impacted by COVID-19 has closed many of our facilities, it hasn't stopped those who hate us or wish us harm. Indeed, this current environment has seen a rise in online hate and anti-Semitism. Our team at SCN, working with our federal security partners, local, state, and federal law enforcement as well, have jointly assessed that far from current conditions driving down anti-Semitism or the likelihood of an attack, it appears that they may exacerbate them, particularly as our community begins to open. At the same time, we recognize that many organizations, to include our camps, are taking into account an extensive array of health, welfare, safety, and security issues as they choose to reopen. All of this means that as we do reopen for the first time since COVID-19 began to impact our community, we need to be even more committed to safety and security. With respect to the threats that we're seeing, and I'd like to thank SCN's team of intelligence analysts working with our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, as well as security directors around the country. There are currently no known credible threats directed at Jewish institutions or organizations, including camps at this time. However, we do know that domestic violent extremists and or individuals inspired by violent rhetoric have targeted religious institutions in the past, to include internationally and nationally our camping environment, and not just the Jewish camping environment. Violent extremists have been observed noting, encouraging, and implying that the Jewish community could be targeted during moments of social unrest or political discord, and certainly in the current communal environment. While we continue to coordinate closely with law enforcement, we note that the heightened threat environment will remain at least through 2021. There is a spectrum of ideologies that have driven violent extremists and political adherents to use recent social and political unrest as an opportunity to take increasingly violent actions against their perceived adversaries and to draw attention to their ideologies. We have observed an increase in references to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which may broaden the threat posed by domestic violent extremists or DVEs to Jewish institutions and organizations to include camps. Some key things to recognize. DVEs who are motivated by a range of ideologies and galvanized by recent political and social unrest in the US pose an elevated threat to our entire country in 2021, and certainly to key institutions and organizations within the Jewish community. Secondly, lone individuals or small groups of DVEs that may adhere to a diverse set of violent extremist ideologies are more likely to carry out violent attacks than organizations or groups, larger groups. Third, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists and militia violent extremists present the most lethal threats, with those racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists most likely to conduct mass casualty attacks against civilians, and militia violent extremists most likely to target law enforcement and government facilities or personnel. We anticipate that domestic violent extremist individuals will continue to pose significant detection and disruption challenges because of their capacity for independent radicalization to violence, which means we may not know who they are until they attempt to undertake a violent activity. We also remain concerned about foreign terrorist organizations and violent extremists from overseas. These threats are real, but they've existed for quite some time. And this past year has been one unlike any of us have ever known. This summer can be a return of sorts to normalcy. There is nothing more normal, more critical, and more Jewish, in my mind, than camp. Again, there are threats. There are always threats, and there will continue to be. And while the current environment is a heightened threat environment, what we want to encourage is being aware of the threats, not letting them paralyze us or inspire fear. Let us work to address them in a reasonable manner, balancing our desire for security and safety with our need for connection. We can do both. That's why programs such as the Camp Security Initiative that we're discussing today, that you'll hear from Jonathan Lacey, is so critical, because it allows safety and security to be addressed by the security professionals in collaboration with other professionals, while allowing those other professionals, our camp counselors, executives, and others, to focus on their mission, which is the well-being, enjoyment, and fun of Jewish camp. We look forward to working with you on this to create a safe, secure, happy experience for the thousands of campers that are looking forward to returning to camp this summer. And we look forward to doing that with you this year and in the coming years. It's now my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Patrick Daly, Chief Operating Officer and Principal Deputy Director of the Secure Community Network. Pat?
Thanks, Michael. And Julie and Jeremy as well. Thank you for your remarks and comments. Today's webinar, as Michael and Julie indicated, is really an advance in a collaborative effort, moving forward a focused effort on safety and security for all of our camps. Personally, since joining SCN, I've had the privilege of working with Jewish camps for nearly over 15 years now, really starting with a Homeland Security project in 2006, where we did a baseline assessment of nearly a dozen camps around the country, get an understanding of the common vulnerabilities, protective measures, and risk environment, from JCC camps in Medford, one of the largest day camps in the country, to Camp Sternberg in New York. I've also had the opportunity to work with many of the partners on this call throughout that time, FJC, JCCA, URJ, Ramah, and many others. So it's a privilege to be here with all of you today as we move into this national webinar. Well, as Michael indicated, generally camps are very safe. They do share common vulnerabilities and risks. And we've long seen camps as some of the more underserved entities as it relates to security, both in proximity and as seasonal operating environments. The program that we discussed today in partnership with UJA has given us the opportunity to really change how we're thinking about protecting Jewish camp in a way that fits their culture and environment and preserves their very intent and role in Jewish life and engagement. Despite some of those gaps and vulnerabilities, many camps are doing great things. Jonathan has seen those firsthand and will share some of those today. And we learn from them and share and transfer those experiences and practices to others. As Michael mentioned, 1 year ago, it was through the vision, leadership, partnership, and generosity of UJA Federation New York that SCN and FJC launched an initial camp security pilot program for New York area camps in an effort to create a first of its kind focused program exclusively dedicated to camp security. Beyond the initial on-the-ground services that have been provided, inclusive of vulnerability assessments, training, and consultation, the outputs of those initial efforts will result in the development and sharing of a best practices security toolkit, which we made available to all camps across the FJC network and beyond. Today's webinar is a growth and outgrowth of those efforts, bringing together security practitioners, camp directors, sharing best practices, voicing concerns, asking questions, and just working together in a network collaborative way, contributing to a single shared mission of safe and secure Jewish camp experiences. To start that conversation, I'm pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Jonathan Lacey, the program's first ever camp security advisor, who oversees and spearheads this initiative. Jonathan spent over 20 years in the FBI as a special agent, and most recently served as a crisis manager, training coordinator, and active shooter coordinator for the FBI Buffalo, New York division. Since joining SCN, Jonathan has conducted scores of security consultations, dozens of assessments, and logged thousands of miles visiting Jewish camps in 2020, despite the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, which closed many of those doors last year. Today, Jonathan will share observations, tips, promising practices, and other practical advice and counsel he's gleaned from nearly 24 camp visits and assessments done last summer and last fall. Through this discussion, we'll break down the key and core components of a comprehensive and holistic security program, observations, lessons learned along with common vulnerabilities and measures to mitigate them, informed through 24 security risk assessments, meeting with camp directors and senior staff, and liaison with camp law enforcement and public safety partners along the way. With that, I'd like to just start, and Jonathan will have a kind of facilitated discussion around some of these items and share some of those practices. So I'd like to start, Jonathan, just at the outset. Last year, obviously, we went into a very different summer, anticipating training, working with camps on site, and obviously, shuttered with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the shift became a big focus on public health, social distancing, and related safety measures, which really put security, understandably, taking a back seat. Recognizing that camps largely are going to open this year, and as Michael articulated, a really heightened threat environment, but one where we're still in the middle of an ongoing pandemic. How are camp directors thinking about security? Can you share some of those conversations that you've had in your visits?
Absolutely, Pat. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the leaders, the other leaders who spoke. This program was launched at the height of the COVID pandemic, just after many camps had made the decision as to whether they could open. And many camps used the shutdown to make physical security improvements and apply for grants. During this time, I had the opportunity to visit with and engage many camp directors, and I really got a firsthand view of how many hats they wear, how many competing priorities they have, and how many decisions they make on every single day. Instrumental in my development of this understanding of the camp world were Jeremy and his team from FJC, especially Michelle Friedman and Amy Bravman, who've been really great partners in this program. As Julie and Michael mentioned, COVID only increased the complexity of the preparations for the upcoming camp season, but I still see a consistent interest by camp leaders in getting more information to help them make informed security decisions. And I think it's important that they have a place to go for consistent best practice security support to inform those decisions. So I saw an opportunity to provide something of value through this program and to be a resource for sharing best practice information from SCN, but also to share the security practices of camps with other camps. Camp directors have been extremely receptive to these efforts. So I would say the camp directors are very much have security on the mind, and that is also demonstrated by the attendance for today's webinar.
Thanks, Jonathan. And as we move forward, obviously with COVID-19 on the mind, but a lot of initial observations you shared. I think you last count logged nearly 19 assessments over 24 camp visits last year. Can you share some of those initial observations during that first year on the camp circuit? Any of those best practices, unique experiences, and some of those emerging concepts around security?
Absolutely. I'll share a few of the many examples of great practices that I saw while on the road last summer and fall, visiting camps and speaking with camp directors continuously since June. I'll try to limit it a little bit because we have a very experienced camp director on our expert panel who you will hear from. But before I start, in the spirit of starting a national conversation on camp security, Jewish camp security, I'd like to encourage my camp colleagues on this call who feel comfortable to do so to share in the chat any security practices that you think other camps could benefit as they prepare for the 2021 camp season. And as you will see from the ones I share, some are low cost or no cost measures and are very simple practices. But if you share them in the chat, you may be helping a great number of your colleagues. And one of these examples is just greeting all visitors. And you would encourage your staff to greet all visitors only when safe to do so, when they feel that it is safe to do so. This serves both a customer service purpose and also a security purpose. Some camps encourage encourage people to do this in pairs for safety reasons. But if you think about the customer service aspect, if I'm a parent and somebody approaches me right away when I pull up to camp, I'm impressed, and I assume the camp is on the ball and will take good care of my children. And it has the dual security benefit of identifying unknown people and putting them on notice that you're aware of their presence. Another category of best practices I observed was the various ways that camps engaged with first responders. Having close relationships with first responders is an absolute best practice that every camp should do. It can help first responders when they're, help them know your camp's layout in advance of an emergency happening, and ensure that they're aware of your unique camp's issues. One camp encourages regular visits every 2 to 3 months from one particular officer on the local force, and they ensure that if that he populates information back to the department. The reason they do this every 2 to 3 months is that assignments change, and occasionally they need to change who it is that visits the camp. They also, the same camp, learned about law enforcement capabilities from that department after an unfortunate missing camper incident. It ended well with no injuries or serious issues, but during that incident, they learned about that department's response capabilities, and that they've put that into their toolkit and in their emergency plans for future use. So they turned a difficult situation, which was ultimately resolved, into a learning experience. A third camp has such a good relationship with their small police department that the department has issued a police radio directly to the camp. So when they call for help, they are directly getting the police department dispatch channel. They have the chief's direct cell phone number. Every new officer on this department tours the camp, and every officer has in their vehicle the camp's emergency plan. Now, this is not possible for every camp to do. Not every department will issue you a police radio, but it's certainly something to strive for, and it just shows the ingenuity of camp directors across the country. One camp employs off-duty police officers as security so that they have up-to-date training and excellent connectivity to their department. This same camp also offers old camp buildings to police and fire, the local police and fire service, in advance of the camp demolishing these buildings. The police use them for tactical training. The fire service actually does a controlled burn and conducts their own training. And that's how this camp demolishes their building. Talk about establishing a good cohesive relationship with your local emergency partners. And finally, another camp does a barbecue every summer for the fire department. And that way every volunteer fireman in the area, they're motivated to come, and they know where to park, where not to park, what the layout is. And that's a practice that's really worked well for this camp. And I will say, just use your imagination. One camp that's far from the local fire service decided to shorten the response time by buying their own fire truck. We're not saying every camp should do that, but it's just a great example of innovation and using your imagination.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I think that last point's a good one, right? We look at proximity, we look at response time, and I think it's a good transition into looking at common vulnerabilities, both from the location of camps, some of the first responder challenges and limitations, both in manpower and resources, but also time and proximity. One of the things that we talk about in any setting, but particularly with camp setting today, is ensuring, and we heard it today, the centrality of the camping experience to Judaism and Jewish life and Jewish future, and really seeking to desire a balance between keeping that feeling both in remote locations, but also urban JCC day camps. How do we strike that balance of achieving measurable security, maybe not so visible security, without sacrificing, the openness? And what are some of those common vulnerabilities that exist across, the variety of camps that you visited that, need to be addressed with that lens in mind?
Right, absolutely. And the question just goes directly to the issue of balance. We have to first acknowledge the reality of the threats that Julie and Michael covered, and that parents are expecting us to provide a safe environment in the midst of. And we also understand that the camp environment, the Jewish camp environment, is extremely special and something to be preserved. So I went into my first camp assessment and said, if at any point my recommendations are hampering your ability to accomplish your mission or materially affect the atmosphere here, then let me know. The reality is that the current risk and threat environment compels us to apply a very high level of care in the camp environment. And this may represent a bit of a change in the thinking about maybe where we draw the line as to what's an acceptable security measure at camp. We may get some guidance from parents as to what they expect us to be doing. And there are certainly best practices to guide us in that direction, but still, we don't want to fortify your camp. We want to integrate our security recommendations in a way that doesn't hamper your mission. This is why I describe security in the camp environment as both an art and a science. The science is the security best practices, and there are volumes written about it by many agencies and professional organizations. But the art is the implementation. When we talk about addressing common security issues and vulnerabilities, such as, most overnight camps have a huge perimeter that would be completely impractical to fence, or, oftentimes camps location plays a role. And I'll get into the more detail on some of the common vulnerabilities, but as we're looking at issues like access control and frequent turnover of staff and neighbor issues, we're talking about risk mitigation, not risk elimination. As Michael made the point that we don't want to live in fear, and we need to weave security so tightly into the fabric of what we do that it's almost not noticed. I asked people to think about Disney as an example of a place that kept the magic atmosphere and still has fantastic security. Nobody comes home from Disney and says, boy, they had great security, but they do. So having great security and the camp magic are far from mutually exclusive, and we will work with you to achieve that goal as you address your camp's vulnerabilities.
Thanks, Jonathan. Can you, we just pulled up some of those common vulnerabilities, and if you could, chat a little bit about some of those, based on some of the experience that you've seen, and then kind of move into some of the kind of core components of that comprehensive security program that we've alluded to at the outset.
Absolutely, and I think we're ready for the next slide. Yeah, as has been addressed before, and I won't get into too much detail, but obviously anti-Semitism is on the rise. And, Michael cited the FBI's most recent hate crimes report that notes that Jews remain by far the religious group most targeted for religious motivated hate crimes at 60%. So anti-Semitism has impacted my camps and camps in general across the spectrum, whether you're talking about urban, rural, suburban, or anywhere in between. But again, that's something that is ever present and something that needs to be a major part of the conversation. So speaking of location, whether you are a remote overnight camp in a rural location or a day camp in a JCC located in the suburbs or city, your camp's physical location has security concerns. It brings with it pros and cons that we should just be aware of and factor into our security planning. And if we look for a minute at the remote location camps, which is most common with overnight camps, but you do see some remote day camps, and I have some, or rural, I should say. That can bring with it longer law enforcement and fire response times. And that's something we can prepare for and should prepare for in our emergency planning process. It will impact how long we should be able to shelter in place or barricade in the event of an active threat situation. And going backwards from there, we should plan to build and outfit our buildings with appropriate lockdown facilities for such an occurrence. It also enhances the need for good communication with law enforcement. Being a remote camp, you need to understand what law enforcement can get to you when, and what communication issues you might have. That's something I'm dealing with few camps that are so remote that their communication is severely hampered by their location, and how we adapt to those characteristics of remote camps is all part of our security planning process. Many remote camps that I have are near very popular hiking trails, and that generates increased trespassing. It's almost like tourism trespassing. People who are hiking through on the Appalachian Trail see a neat place that they want to stop by and take a look at. And it causes security concerns for the camps, understandably. Remote location can also be a benefit, as there's less exposure to outsiders, both foot and vehicular traffic. Now, being located in an urban or suburban area is most common in my experience with day camps, and high population and high traffic can increase crime in the area, and it can increase, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And it can also, on the plus side, though, it can give you quicker law enforcement and police response times. Now, another aspect that impacts both rural and urban camps is seasonal occupation, which you mentioned before, Pat. This can cause increased trespassing for both types of locations, and camps are addressing this through remotely monitored cameras, sensors, caretakers, security staff, police patrols, and a number of other measures that I'll mention a little bit later. Another common vulnerability is the large and open perimeter, which I mentioned before. It's an issue for both rural and urban camps, day and overnight. They're difficult to secure and monitor. Fencing is often impractical, if not impossible. So the result is you get people on your camp who shouldn't be there. And this could take the form of young people using your facilities to drink, use drugs, and leave the remnants of their activities for your campers to find in the morning. So this could require camera coverage, police coordination, security staffing, community outreach, and certainly daily checks prior to campers arriving in the case of day camps. Moving on, we have neighbor concerns. So for overnight camps, especially, many locals perceive a disruption of their area by outsiders. And this can be independent of religion or identity. The influx of traffic in a normally quiet area, or stores being busier all of a sudden, a flood of what's been referred to by one camp director at the city council meeting. Somebody said there's all these out-of-state plates of people coming into town, clogging up the roads. Camp staff can sometimes out in the community, if they're walking from camp, can clog traffic, and that's been a concern that's been raised about a camp I'm aware of. And you hear noise complaints from neighbors about camps, the use of their PA system for discretionary uses as opposed to emergency uses that can cause some consternation among neighbors. And there are neighbors who feel an entitlement to use the camp facility because they live next to it and they have to deal with inconveniences as a result of the camp. One camp allows limited use of the facility in exchange for the neighbors' patience and also vigilance during the off season. Now, certainly this carries insurance liability implications. So you would only want to consider doing this after checking with your lawyer and insurance company. But, again, imaginative ways to solve problems. This same camp sends out gift baskets for key holidays that their neighbors celebrate. And that's another way just to get in front of neighbor issues. And of course, anti-Semitism, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the panel, has resulted in a number of documented incidents for camps that I work with. And the one I'll touch on real quick is frequent staff turnover. Seasonal staff for camp employs, it's a huge group of people, and not everybody's suited for this kind of work, and as a result, people are regularly terminated. And I think that has resulted in a theme of conflict with fired staff as something that I've seen while I've been out on the road. And in speaking with camp directors who have been able to avoid that, they tell me that they never want it to be a surprise when somebody is in fact terminated. So, have a performance management system, think through your termination process, make sure you're safe. Should security be notified or physically present? Do you have the ability to communicate? And there are a lot of additional considerations surrounding this that we'll get to and publish. I hope to publish something on that in the future. And another is custody and other parent issues. And certainly custodial issues are something that camps are prepared to deal with. I also heard a great deal from parents who, or camps that had parents who had a disagreement with the camp, and that rose to the level of being a security concern. And this blends all of your basic security principles. Situational awareness. You want your staff to be aware of any special custody situations or grievances against the camp. Emergency planning, access control. Do you have a security staff? And people need to be alert for conflict occurring. And you should have procedures for getting campers away from a volatile situation. And camp counselors need to be alert for these things. Certainly your missing camper protocols will come into this. And we need to realize that drop off, pick up, and we probably won't be doing visiting day or alumni day this summer with COVID, but days like that and times like that are particularly vulnerable for camps. So we need to exercise increased vigilance during those times. And I think we're ready for the next slide.
Thanks, Jonathan. So just for the sake of time, I want to move this next component into the panel discussion. So what I'll ask is for Sean and Alan to join us on video and unmute yourselves. And Jonathan will cover some of the camp security program piece there. But want to do a kind of quick intro to our panelists who were briefly mentioned at the outset. But Sean Brokos is Director of Community Security for the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh. She's a career veteran of the FBI, and we're grateful that she played a significant role in the investigation and prosecution following the Tree of Life shooting in 2018, and has joined us today. Thank you, Sean. And then Alan Silverman, as Michael mentioned, Director of Camp Mosheva in Honesdale, PA. Alan has served in his leadership role as Camp Director at Mosheva for over 30 years. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for your time and your commitment to this. And I'm just going to start with a couple of questions, and certainly participants, please, if there's any questions you want to add to the Q&A, we will get through those as soon as we get through the initial questions. Alan, I'll start with you just briefly. I know, I've had a chance to come at your camp. Jonathan has as well. You did a tremendous amount of work through the security grant program and implemented a tremendous number of security measures over the past couple of years. Obviously, being selective in what you don't want to share too broadly. If you could talk through some of those, some of those vulnerabilities that you had closed through that process to share with the group.
Okay, thank you, and a big shout out to both to Patrick and to Jonathan for all their help over the past few years. That really, I think, has helped us tremendously in improving our security situation. First of all, we worked hard to improve security at our entrance gate. We are blessed with the fact that there's really one main entrance to get into camp, although I'll talk about the rear entrance in a minute or so. But besides putting in a very strong, electronic gate at the entrance, we do have a 24/7 security guard at the gate. We moved away from having the security guard when he or she would approve someone to go in to just push a button to open the gate, but rather there's a code that they have to enter. So I'll make up a number. Let's say they have to enter 300. That will, open the gate. But if there's someone comes to the gate that's of concern, or that threatens the guard and says, "Open the gate or I'll kill you," or whatever it might be, then they enter a different code, which is a panic code. So it may open the gate, but it will call the local police, automatically call the local police department, will call us up in camp, et cetera, and give us an opportunity to use some of our emergency codes for our children to scatter or to hide themselves so they're not prominent there. We have a significant gate pass set up, so every car coming in, whether it's staff coming in or visitors, they get a gate pass. We make a copy of their driver's license, and I think this year it will be actually tied with the company. We'll actually check it and see if there's any kind of problem with what is allowed, legally, for someone who's not law enforcement to do. We had a problem in the past of sometimes if the gate was open, someone had just left and the guard was in the guard shack, that someone would just drive through even though there's signs there that say to stop. So now we put a secondary gate, which the guard can close. So it's about 30 yards, 40 yards up the hill into the entrance to camp. So if somebody actually goes past the main gate without stopping, they will be stopped by a secondary gate. As deliveries would come up the hill into camp, particularly to the kitchen, etc., our security people identified the fact that we do have play fields and other things right there, and someone could just drive their car, their truck off and ram. And so we we are presently adding in boulders and bollards to prevent that from happening. In our rear, from the rear side of camp, there is a pipeline at the edge of our land in which some people in RVs could then drive up an old rear road. We opened up that road. We put lights and cameras there. And we have a gate that would prevent them coming, when they come in off that from there, they would not be able to get into camp, etc. And we greatly increased the number of cameras. We have some 40 to 50 cameras now, all around camp in a variety of places to help us to deal with that. So all of these things. One last thing was that was noticed was we have what other camps might call flagpole. We call it miscad. On Fridays, where the whole camp is in one place in the 45 minutes hour before Shabbat, and they Homeland Security in particular was very concerned about that when they came to visit camp, as well as Jonathan. And so we do have a night guard, a roving night guard in addition to our guard at the gate, and that guard who normally comes in from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. That guard on Friday comes in at 6 and is there at the top of the hill, watching where we have our miscad or our flagpole program. Someone just asked if we monitor the cameras 24/7. We are installing the cameras in the guard shack. The guard will also be a look. It's in my house. It's in the main office, in the main room, and it's in my office as well. But I think the true answer to that is I wouldn't say that we're really monitoring it 24/7. There's not someone who's sitting there watching it, from morning to night. That wouldn't be accurate.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate you sharing. Sean, I want to turn to you. We know the value of preparation and training and the amount of work that's been done in the Pittsburgh community. Can you share some of those programs and thoughts as it relates to applicability in the camp environment as well?
Sure, and let me start out by saying thank you for having me here today. Many of the things I will mention came as a result of what we call an after action review after the attack on the Tree of Life building. So I'll mention several things that we took away from that as lessons learned, and we're translating those into what we call best practices, but they're applicable for the community at large, as well as camps. So I know Alan did a great job talking about access control. First and foremost, access control is so essential. And if there is a way to monitor cameras 24/7, that's the best of all worlds, but at least having that very good camera coverage, good access control. And I just want to add on that a bit. Access control also, it means prohibiting people from coming in, but also knowing who is authorized to come in. So make sure your staff is wearing, whether it's uniforms or badges or photo ID badges, just make sure you know who should be on premises and who really should not be on premises. So Jonathan mentioned this a lot, and there were some great comments in the chat about this, but police liaison, police relationships, trust me from experience, we saw this firsthand during the Tree of Life attack, knowing your state, local, and federal police first responders, invite them to come tour the camp, invite them for coffee. I know, I think it was Jeff Nobi, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, said that he invites the local police to do active shooter drills. Local, state, federal police are always looking for locations to do these drills and to come to, whether it's a day camp or an overnight camp, for them to be able to walk through your entire premises, all 100, 200 acres, whatever the case may be, go to the outbuilding and see it firsthand, because if they have to respond during, whether it's in a medical emergency or a critical event, then having that familiarity is so essential. And it's seconds or minutes that can save lives. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And along that point, have a dedicated known reunification point. Again, we saw this here during October 27th. Make sure you have that identified. Make sure parents know it. Make sure the police know it. Make sure the kids know it, and the staff. And even do a practice run. Take a day or a morning and do a practice run. Make sure everybody knows where it is and can get there. So again, something just very important. And then I want to reiterate communication, notifications. How are you talking to one another during your day? How are you talking to police if needed? Do you have a police radio? If not, can you get one? If you're in a remote area and you don't have cell coverage, try and get a police radio where you at least have the 911 capabilities. And that also goes for camera coverage. If there's some remote camera coverage that would be allowed, but make sure you have really good notification systems in place and test them. Again, do a test drill. All of these things can be tested either during camp season or right before camp season begins. It's that essential. Look to have an emergency notification system in place, whether it's through your PA system or it's some sort of mobile pendants, alerts, call boxes, something like that. Training and drills, I can't say enough about that. It's been shown time and time again, folks getting trained on active threat, first aid, CPR, stop the bleed. Each active shooter incident we've reviewed, and I did this at the FBI for many years, those are things that can save lives. And it's really just until first responders come. So that training is absolutely critical. One thing we did here in Pittsburgh, and I'm happy to help if anybody has questions on this, is putting go bags, what we call go bags. They're literally red backpacks that are light and portable. We put 500 of those out into our community to include our schools, but also our camps. They have first aid kits, they have trauma kits, they have lockdown supplies, flashlights, glow sticks, anything you would need if you maybe let's say stuck in the woods or locking down somewhere. We put them together. They were easy to do. We did a community volunteer effort, and just something that's great for camp counselors to be able to sling over their shoulder if they're going away to more of a remote area of the camp. And speaking of that, lockdown locations, make sure you have your identified lockdown locations, and make sure that you have first aid equipment in there, food, water, essentials. Just, again, this is until police arrive and can render aid and render it safe again. And then lastly, we know that there is a tremendous threat arena out there now. There's threats from COVID. There's threats from the rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen. We want to do everything we can to protect our children and our youth. One thing that we do here, and I know SCAN does it as well, is track threats in your community. See what's going on out there. Make sure you keep your finger on the pulse and know the tempo. And I'm happy to help folks further with that. But if you have a director of security at your local federation, go through him or her for this, or go through SCAN. But be sure to report any threats directed to you and vet them out. So I know I threw a lot out there. These are takeaways from the attack on the Tree of Life that we had here in Pittsburgh. And as awful as it was, it's given us some really good things to think about as we go forward and try and, repair, rebuild, and mitigate. I like what Jonathan said. You'll never eliminate risk, but you can do everything you can to mitigate it.
Thanks, Sean, and appreciate all the work you've done in sharing your time here. So I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 quick follow-ups while we have time, and then we'll close with Jeremy. Alan, just want to go to you very quickly. I think Sean's point at the end was a good one, right? Understanding of local threats and risks. In a brief minute or two, can you share any, you've been at Moshe Bar for a long time, can you share any experience of the anti-Semitic incidents that kind of help think through informing any of your security efforts locally?
Yeah, and over the last 5 years or so, we've had a number of, we've had some incidents that helped, keep everything sort of fresh, and that we had to really work on this. We had an incident where our staff were at a movie theater, and locals were hurling, anti-Semitic, epithets, throwing coins at them, really treating them in a very nasty sort of way, and they definitely all, felt threatened. We had a similar thing in the Walmart parking lot, which is not far from us, where they were surrounded by, locals in jeeps who were threatening them. We had a case where our campers and staff were out hiking, and a local drove by in a pickup truck and actually fired a firearm into the air, and we had to deal with that. We were hacked. That was a while ago. We woke up on a Sunday morning, and we were, our website was hacked, and there were a number of things on that hack that were really disconcerting in terms of implied threats, etc. I'm happy to say in those cases, in that particular case, both the state police and the FBI came in, within 24 hours, actually with the help of SCAN, to make sure. I think Patrick was involved, but that did make a difference, certainly, because as Jonathan mentioned, that we are relatively remote, mile and a half off of a main road, etc. The truth is that on campus, we've maybe had one person that didn't belong here in the 35 years that I'm here. So that has not been an issue that we've had to face. In all those situations, both that I mentioned before, the state police were very helpful, the local police were very helpful. And one last thing I want to say that I didn't mention before is that we have a program, although it's a little problematic right now, but it's still going to be active for 2021. That there are these push-to-talk phones called PTTs, and all of our staff. We have some 300 of them, so that we can communicate with pretty much all of our staff. And we also have a loudspeaker system, but we can do that directly, both focused and to the whole staff all at one time. And they have the ability to call 911 as well. So our communication system is quite advanced and works quite well.
Great, thank you, Alan. We're at time, actually just running over, so my apologies. I just want to thank all of our panelists. Jonathan, Julie, thank you as always for your leadership and participation support. I want to just turn it over to Jeremy Fingerman to close us out. I do want to just make one comment that This webinar will be it has been recorded and will be shared out with additional resources. But Jeremy, I'll turn it to you to close this out, sir.
Thank you, Patrick, and thanks to everybody. We know, especially in the midst of preparing to reopen camps this summer, we just thank you for taking the time to join for today's webinar. I want to thank the SCAN team for all their efforts organizing this session, and of course to UJA Federation of New York, who has invested in the FJC SCAN relationship to make these focused resources available. I heard three things that I want to. This was all about raising awareness. In the midst of all the COVID presentations, raise awareness. Three things repeated that it's really about encouraging partnerships with local authorities and first responders. Several people mentioned that. Second, with your colleagues at local camps, both Jewish camps and secular camps in your area. And the third, encourage partnerships with your local federations and with SCAN. We're here to help, and ask you to contact me or Michelle Friedman at FJC, and we'll be as helpful as we can. So I want to just think back, and I'll end with where we were a year ago this month. We were communicating the emotional disappointment of having to cancel last summer, and it has been a long, exhausting, and really anxious and uncertain year. And yet, with all your resilience, hard work, and determination, we're positioned as a field together as we re-enter to a new era of Jewish connection, engagement, and participation. Thank you all, and we wish you much success. Thanks.